Hello, everyone. It's my incredible pleasure to invite Jim Safka to the stage today. Jim is the former CEO of Match. He actually before Match, he led high growth marketing at Intuit. He took E-Trade from 300,000 to 3 million active accounts as the VP marketing and product, and then turned around Match, which had stagnated with several quarters of non-growth. So Jim, thank you so much for making the occasion to be with us.
Absolutely, Mark. It's great to see you. It's great to be here. I'm honored to be here, and it's just been, I think, too long. So I have to make this more of a regular thing. I love this industry, love this category, and I just met some of the greatest people while working in it.
Wonderful. I'm thrilled that you love us and returning to us to provide some attention to us. You know, I often find there's a lot of executives that will come into the industry, they'll go off to other things, and then they'll miss us. So I do try and stay in contact with folks, and it was great to hear of.
Yeah. It's fascinating, like how anybody ever ends up in this industry, right? Like when I started at Match, I'd been married, had kids for 10 years. When I was single, which was a long time before that, I was terrible at it. I mean, I ultimately found somebody who was way out of my league, and I got lucky. But I had no experience per se, and nor any expertise in. If anybody looked at my credentials there, it would have been a total fail. So in that respect, to become the CEO of a company like Match was a unexpected surprise, and so rewarding. It turned out to be, for the business, tremendous, and for me personally, one of the best experiences of my life.
And you were there 2004 through 2007. I'd love to ask you, what would you say during your tenure? I mean, you turned the company around. What one strategic move are you most proud of during that period?
Gosh, that's a tough question. I mean, it's a lot of little things, but I would say one of them was bringing on a guy named Adam Hanft. Adam was a mentor and partner with me at AT&T Wireless previously. He's got his fingerprints on just about everything I've ever done that's any good. He runs an ad agency, marketing agency in New York City. And he was instrumental in all the effective marketing that we did, and some very innovative things. He also brought along this guy named Dr. Clotaire Rapaille. And Clotaire was a cultural anthropologist. And we worked with him in each of the international markets that Match was successful in. And he helped us understand, the different cultures, and, the general idea of, two people want to meet is pretty universal, but how they do it and making it culturally relevant in the product and in the marketing ended up being really important and fundamental to our success internationally, which fueled a lot of the growth that you mentioned when I was there. As an example, in the United States, at least at the time, and it's probably changed a little bit since, but probably not entirely, the dream, was the fairy tale was the bride on her wedding day, and that was the cultural imprint. And Dr. Rapaille helped us understand that, and eHarmony did a tremendous job marketing to that objective. And and so, for example, when we would go, and so that was very much what we were dealing with in the US. In France, as an example, if we were to put a woman in a wedding dress in any of our marketing, or even talk about that as being the end goal, it would have failed entirely, because what we learned was that people are interested in connecting with others on the platform, but not so much to get to the goal of being married. It's more like find somebody to share a piece of the road with, and during that time of your life. And the person you're sharing that road with may not be the only other person on that road, but it's that. And Meetic understood that intrinsically, as being a company that was born and raised in France. But for us, that was enlightening, and it helped us really understand what to do there. Similar stories, I won't get into all of them unless you're curious, and in Japan and in other countries as well. But strategically, yeah, I mean, and then you talk about strategic moves. The guy who was running our international business when I started was Joe Cohen, and he was tremendous. And Joe is a dear friend, and I'm so impressed by him. But keeping a guy like that when I'm coming in new, retaining him and promoting him and getting behind him, I can't take so much credit for all the success at Match. It's really the people that I brought on. Some of them were already there, and some I brought in from the outside. But Joe was one that was already there, and yeah, international was a big part of our growth, and I give him full credit for that.
I remember Joe and Adam. Mandy you brought on, Mandy Ginsberg, who went on to run the
Yeah,
company. She was studying
yeah,
chemistry. I first met
yeah.
her when you were kind enough to invite me to Gramercy Tavern for a get-together with some
Mm,
press folks. There was David Carr from Jupiter Research there.
yeah.
And one of the things that you announced at that gathering
Mm,
was there's a time when Match had, I think, what is about 300 and something million run rate. And you said Match would be taken to over $1 billion. Of course, it did and beyond. So I'd like to ask you,
mhm.
how has Match strategy diverged from where you might have taken it, I wonder?
Mm. Well, a lot of the things that happened and fueled that growth to $1 billion were things that I started and put in motion and before I left. So, I mean, most of the growth getting to $1 billion has been through M&A, and so when I was during my tenure, we began the discussions with Meetic as an example. We had long dialogues with Yahoo Personals. It wasn't an acquisition; it was more of a business deal, but and then yeah, many of the acquisitions that ended up getting done were conversations that me and my team had started. So in that respect, we knew that rolling up the category and M&A was going to be pretty fundamental in our ability to grow the business. But how would I have done it differently? I think the main thing is, in terms of creating a better experience for the customers and the users, it seems that the company is really focused on the monetization aspect of the business, which, is behind some of that growth. But, you can take that too far and where the user experience really degrades. And I think they have. I think they have, and they're feeling it right now, the result of that. But I would have really focused much more on creating a joyful user experience. And I would have focused on innovation. I mean, if you think about how any of these platforms work today, it's the same way they worked, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, the ones that were around. And that's just not innovation. I mean, it's the only innovation in terms of creating a better customer experience and creating joy and delight for the customers. I would have been hell bent on advocating for that as the thing that's going to create a sustainable growth business. So that's a little bit different, but I think the M&A side is totally consistent with the other wheels I'd set in motion.
So one of the very distinctive moves that you made was infusing Match with more character by bringing on the character of Dr. Phil. So how did that go? In fact, what was his tagline? Match will show you who, Dr. Phil will show you how. So how did that go for
That's right.
members and for Match?
Yeah, I mean that was a big bet we placed. I mean, he hadn't done anything like this before, and so it was a big bet because he's not cheap, and it was a real innovation. So he created a program called Mind Find Bind, and it really was Match will show you who, Dr. Phil will show you how. And one of the things that I discovered by listening to our customers and prospective customers that hadn't signed up yet was that there, at the time, and maybe even still to some degree now, that there was some real stigma associated with the category, and where people weren't really excited to say how they met if they met on one of the platforms. And so what Dr. Phil did for us that I think was just really critical was that he brought this category, online dating, right into the mainstream. I mean, if people either love Dr. Phil or hate him. I mean, he's very polarizing. But one thing that he does represent is, what's normal and good in the culture. And when he, got behind online dating, it made it feel safe and acceptable for people, really brought us into the mainstream. And that was key because if you're a business like Match, you don't grow by stealing share. You only grow by growing the category. And so he unlocked so much additional growth for us. And the program, in terms of Dr. Phil will show you how, we didn't fully realize all of its potential. So there is still great opportunity on the advice side, in terms of helping people realize who they are, self-discovery to start. and you got to be, happy with yourself, and you have to understand yourself. If you're ever going to be successful in a relationship with somebody else, it starts with you. And I think there's a lot of work to be done in terms of people understanding themselves and then reflecting that in their profiles and making their profiles more beautiful, because just about every human being out there is a beautiful soul indeed. And a lot of people just really undersell themselves or misrepresent themselves. And so I think there's a lot of room to grow on the advice side of the business. So we started that, didn't finish it, but I still think there's a lot of potential there. And then, of course, we put Dr. Phil in our advertising, and we were very successful with that. We measure all the media purchases at Match very closely to see what kind of lift we get. We always test different cohorts in different markets. And we found that when we looked at our next best advertising that we'd done without Dr. Phil and compared it to the work we did with Dr. Phil, he gave us like a 35% lift over our best previous. So he really was an accelerator for us, and he really did help bring the category into the mainstream. And as I said, he's polarizing, and you either love him or hate him. But what we found was that if you're one of the people that hates him, it didn't get in the way of you still wanting to use the platform. You just wouldn't use his service per se, but subconsciously, all of a sudden it felt all right, a safe place to go.
One of the other things that Match was always very good at was locking up distribution deals at scale. And of course, there's a Microsoft deal that was locked up.
Yeah.
And then after that, there was a masterful move that was made with Yahoo Personals, which was kind of was wondering what to do next. Yahoo Personals kind of like, okay, we're Yahoo for search, but they also were wondering, they were in a bit of a muddy situation with their strategy for Yahoo Personals. Ooh, what did you do? How did you play it? How did you convert them? And what was the end result of that?
Yeah, well, Yahoo Personals, I didn't ultimately end up converting. That was a couple years down the line. Mm-hmm. But I spent a lot of time over there in, I think, Sunnyvale it was, and trying to help them understand the potential of us running their personals channel. And so I probably had 10 discussions with them. And at first they were pretty standoffish, right? Like, we're competitors. Why are you talking to us? But eventually they started to understand, how the math works. And we learned this from the MSN deal, which was a distribution deal where we ran MSN Personals. That channel, Microsoft, was a huge driver of our growth. And at the time, our base business, a good deal of it was through that Microsoft traffic. And what we found was that, and it's really a data exercise, where when you add more profiles, when you combine these businesses, you can see what it does in terms of creating a better user experience, especially in the smaller DMAs. But it really shows up in the conversion. The overall physics of the subscription business there's some synergy there. So we could quantify, based on just looking at their database of users, we could actually quantify what the lift would be to our business, the overall business, and also based on the MSN deal, what their cut of that could be. And we were able to show, consistently, it would be a net improvement for them, not even factoring in the costs of that they could take out of their business by having us run it. So we helped them understand the math, and then the deal eventually, got done when they were going through a strategic review about what they wanted to be vertically integrated into. But yeah, the math really tells the story there, and it's that same formula more or less that we would use when looking at M&A.
And Yahoo Personals essentially went away. It was just powered by Match, and it was an amazing way of turning an avid competitor that was at some scale. I mean, they had several hundred thousand.
Yeah.
So,
they were big.
Yeah,
they were big, but they didn't have, most of their users would just come. It would be convenience traffic. They just happened to be there, and there it is. In terms of a brand and what it stood for, it didn't have any particular identity. It was just Yahoo Personals. It was kind of classified,
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I think that was one of the challenges ultimately to them, trying to grow it further. What is their identity, and are they going to be able to invest in marketing, the way we could? Also, as I said, the the lift you get in terms of user experience and conversion when you combine the databases is pretty tremendous. And I spoke with the folks after that finally got done, and the math just proved true. So going, a lot of M&A, you go at various companies, you hope for the best result when you digest it, and you hope it delivers, what you hypothesized, but it doesn't always. In the case of a personal business and the subscription business, the math ends up being pretty obvious. We have, at Match today, I'm sure still, but at the time, I think the most valuable people we had were the people in the data science group and the data and analytics, because anything good that we ever did was really driven by data. Every feature we would do, it's launch, listen, learn. We would A/B test anything that rolled out new on the site, and we confirmed that hopefully the user experience is better, but it's going to give lift to the business before we'd roll it out more broadly.
So one of the things that you toyed with, I remember we talked in New York, and you had grand designs on introducing matchmakers into the experience, actual matchmakers. Now, what I heard was that you'd actually hired 4 matchmakers in Dallas as you were spinning up the testing around this. And then I didn't hear anything more. Apparently, the matchmakers were no more, and the matchmaking was no more. So what's the backstory there? What happened to the matchmaking?
Yeah, you're right. We talked about it in New York, and I had at the time, still have, a lot of heart for matchmakers. Matchmaking, in terms of, it's like in different cultures and markets, it's not necessarily a third party. Maybe it's a family member, but the idea of matchmaking is powerful, especially for the folks that could use a little bit of advice and they need a little bit of a shove to get out there. It's like having a personal trainer, if you will, at the gym. It's, if you can afford it and stick with it, it's so much more effective, and it's a motivator, actually. If the trainer's going to be at the gym, you better not miss it, because you're paying them. And so you're more likely to just go to the gym. I think that little shove that people get from a matchmaker, in addition to the kinds of people they're going to meet, there's just great benefits there for a certain segment and audience. And so I was, we called it Match Platinum, I think. And then I was very excited about this. And you're right, we did do the pilot. And what was ultimately most challenging, it was scaling that business. What I found, when you have an outstanding matchmaker, they pay for themselves, and they deliver great value for the customers, and it's a profitable thing. But not all matchmakers are created alike. The ones that are the stars are super effective, and then there's kind of everybody else. And so the challenge was, how do we find and recruit the stars and that are out there? Because collectively, as a network, I think they could be super effective and powerful for any one of these businesses. It's a question of, how do you scale it? How do you get to those people quickly and convince them this is the platform to do it on? And then in terms of, when we tried thinking about, like, some of our customer service people could, some of the stars there grow into a matchmaking role. And we had some success there, actually. But again, it takes a certain gene, I think, to be a matchmaker, and a particularly good one. And so scaling it was tough. And in the mix of all the priorities, it wasn't that it was costing so much, because it essentially paid for itself. It was more the distraction, for something that's delivering 1% of the revenue at the time, is taking up, 20% mind share of a lot of the senior staff. And so it was on that basis that we didn't pursue it, but I hope it gets spun back up again. I have a lot of heart for it. I think it could be successful, and I think you could cultivate, matchmakers who aren't in that business right now, because it's not so much the matchmaking, per se. If they have that gene, where they're extroverted and understand people really well, and have passion, then I think that there's a lot of people who aren't matchmakers that could be. And what that would require is some kind of masterclass training program that is part and parcel with the product.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Mhm.
Interesting. So an open opportunity. So swiping is brilliant, of course, but is it dying a death? Has the core experience of Tinder really evolved or suffered, in your opinion, over the last several years?
Yeah. Well, I can understand why it was popular, going way back to the times of Hot or Not, as an example, right? And I think it's super problematic in a number of ways. First, I think that this generation that's growing up right now, Gen Z, I think it's called, uh, and I experienced this with my own kiddos, right? They have the phones and their devices. They weren't on, they weren't on Tinder. But I say that, and then what I want to say next is thank God, right? But they were on their devices all the time, Snapchat and all the other applications that they use. And what it does is that every time you get a match or somebody responds to you, you get a dopamine hit. And so that feels good, and it's really tough for anything to compete with that. It's addictive, it's intoxicating, but ultimately I don't think it serves most people well. You have a whole generation that's growing up with their devices. I read this article in the New York Times, and it was just the irony of there were two people at this bar or restaurant, and then another couple of people, and they're both on one of the apps swiping away, but they never even connected or even said hi to each other. People that are growing up in this digital era, who are so addicted to their devices, I think socially, when they get out there into the world and have to meet anybody, have a more difficult time than previous generations, and I don't think that's a good thing. And swiping is kind of like the with the nicotine and stuff. It's like vaping. It's that dopamine hit you get, whatever hit you get, that little lift you get, feels good, and ultimately it's addictive, but ultimately destructive. I think people have to get out there and start meeting people and talking with people. People that would otherwise be super effective socially are today awkward. That was exacerbated by what happened with COVID. But yeah, I think so. Is it dead? No, because I think it's too intoxicating. Is there a better way to do things? I would hope so.
So what comes after the swipe? Really, where do we go from here? A lot of read Tinder because they've locked up the IP around it.
Yeah. Well, I think that the core problem that these companies and we were trying to solve is how can you get two people to meet who might not otherwise ever have met? And there's a lot of ways to think about doing that. So anything that goes after that objective and is successful, I think will move the industry forward. And so one of the ironic things about, we talk about like Tinder and the swiping apps, is during the COVID time, when people were supposed to be inside distancing and not meeting, all of the dating apps saw extraordinary growth, 20-30%. It's like, wow, isn't that something? You're not supposed to meet, but people are still getting utility out of it. Now, I think people just had more time on their hands. I think a lot of people just, ignored the distancing aspect of it. But it just, isn't it interesting that at the time when you weren't supposed to be meeting, these apps really that are designed to get you to meet take off. And I think that says a lot to, the utility of the swipe, and so, yeah, where does it go from here? I think that anything that gets after getting two people together who might not otherwise ever meet, whether that's in events, whether that's in matchmaking, I think there's a lot of ways to do this. And that's, we haven't seen true innovation in this category since I was there. The last 10 years, 20 years, you can't say that there's been great innovation in these apps. I look at them today and they're the same as they were 10 years ago, only worse. Right, because of all the monetization. So yeah, I think it's fertile territory, but it takes innovators, and it takes creativity, and it takes somebody that was willing to take some risks. And I think one of the challenges is once you become so big and you've turned the screws so far on monetization, it's tough to ever go back. So a company coming in with fresh ideas and this more open, I think has great opportunity, because these big companies are also so big. You're not seeing a lot of innovation from within. If there's going to be innovation, I think it's going to come from something smaller and faster moving, that can orbit the giant hairball.
It's classic Clayton Christensen, isn't it? Disruption from outside. Plenty of Fish did that, really. Plenty of Fish was very much the disruptor. You recognize this years ago. It was a clear affront whenever the rest of the industry was charging $20 a month. Plenty of Fish came in, 100% free, put away your credit card with this cheesy ugly
Yep.
Craigslist of online dating. And so that was
Yeah.
the classic Clayton Christensen back then, but it's disruptive insofar as it was free when everything else was paid. That was the
Yeah.
paywall. We converted 10%, and people stuck around for 3 months. And then it went to zero essentially with mobile. There was a land grab. VCs came in, money was great, and everyone got funded, and then the VC money dried up. We kind of had to stand alone. And here we are. We're back. We've been through this kind of media cycle of online, then mobile. Now what? What else do we have? We've got this thing called augmented reality, and we're moving to this potentially new format with the glasses, perhaps. I mean, do you see some future there?
No, it's
scary and crazy.
no, absolutely not. It's laughable. I mean, as I say, that people have to, if this is an industry and a category where you're trying to get two people to meet, right? And anything that keeps it in the virtual world, God forbid the augmented reality, like, no, just go meet, right? It's but that's so uncomfortable for so many people, especially this generation going up. I've seen that a lot of these companies today are, trying to figure out how to target Gen Z, and they're I think by like making profile creation easier using AI, so you don't have to do it yourself. This goes against everything I believe in, which is that process of self-discovery. You have to understand yourself, love yourself before you have any business being in a relationship with somebody else. And that requires hard work, not AI. AI is not going to give you that solution. It's just too superficial. And so, it's uncomfortable for people to meet, even more so now, as I said, because they've been so addicted to devices for so long. But we need some forcing mechanism to get folks together, in person. But look, if you were going to stick with swiping or some variation of it, I think Plenty of Fish was brilliant. And started by Marcus, a brilliant guy. I have so much respect for him. What a sweetheart he is, and what a clever guy he is. And I think that, if you think about where there are opportunities today, what if you created essentially a swiping app, just basically a reverse engineered Tinder, which is, it's not a difficult app to create, right? It's pretty simple, hasn't changed much. But what if it was just free, right? Just same thing, a page right out of Plenty of Fish's playbook. And if it got critical mass, and you could do this organically, going market by market, right, bootstrapping it, it would have such a better user experience than any of these apps they're trying to skin the cat in so many different ways. It's just really annoying. And there's this Gen Z. Here's the thing. I mean, it's like when I was at Match, that younger generation doesn't have a lot of money, and they've got a lot of other options. They don't want to pay. Most of them aren't going to pay. And so it's not, how do you make the app relevant for them? It's no, the growth in terms of paid subscribers is somewhere else on the curve. And there are a lot of people that are plenty motivated to pay. Most marriages don't work out, unfortunately. And for the person who's getting back into dating, it's their second time around, these Match and other apps, I mean, they have enormous utility for this kind of person whose whole social world was orbiting around a family unit, and the only people you meet are kids' teachers and other parents with kids. And so how do you go out? It's a very weird thing for most people, but that's where most of the utility is. And it's that audience that has money that are very glad to pay for a subscription, and that's a huge audience, and it's continuing to grow. So I think there's much more fruit in that for us than trying to figure out how to crack that with Gen Z, which is, it ain't gonna happen. It ain't gonna happen. It's certainly not gonna happen to the scale where you achieve meaningful growth. They don't want to pay. They don't have the money. I'm generalizing, of course. Some do, but most don't.
There was a point in the article, you mentioned the New York Times articles. There was one point in there where one of the people that the journalist interviewed had said that she was actually almost turned off by anyone that she would meet that admitted to paying on a dating app. That was a cringe moment for me, thinking, it was like, well, look, it's only fair. A fair price for a job done well is the introduction of somebody who wouldn't have ordinarily have met, to your point of serendipity. So I was like, if there is, how do we demonstrate value around serendipity? And really at the heart of that, compatibility profiling, We've got to understand who people are and what makes a match, and demonstrate that and sell people on that to extract value and a fair wage for a job well done, essentially. So how do we get through to what does compatibility mean in the future, do you think? How do we demonstrate that? Where should we go when it comes to compatibility?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think as I mentioned before, it starts with, understanding yourself. And it's a great opportunity if you're thinking about leveraging one of these apps or services, Match.com, Bumble, whoever, Tinder. It's a great opportunity to take a step back and go, wait a minute, who am I? What's the best version of me? And then how do I articulate that so when somebody looks at my profile, they're seeing the best version of me, and one that's still authentic. And I think that comes from, there's a process and a moment of self-reflection that I think would serve a lot of folks well. And it extends through the rest of the profile. Let's say the photographs that are there. I don't photograph, particularly well, but occasionally, like 100, there'll be a photo that's like, they look all right. But I'd like to think that's more what I look like in person than what some of the photos might suggest. So I think that, photography is hugely important, especially in the swiping world. We're such visual creatures. But I think words matter, and articulating the best version of yourself, up and down and side to side in your profile will serve you well as a customer, as a user. Yeah, because it's valuable insight you'll gain if you do that process rigorously. And then, you'll be part of that process is, who complements you, and you really start to understand, more clearly what it is you're looking for, who it is you're looking for. And so I think that this would be enormously helpful. Sadly, it seems the industry is going in the other direction, which is, make it easier to set up profiles. You don't want to write about yourself, just check these boxes, right? And you're just plowing through it, and you're not going to answer the questions authentically. You're going to answer them all aspirationally. So it's not really going to be who you truly are. It doesn't get to your soul. And I think that, and all in an effort to make things more interesting for Gen Z, which again, I don't think that's mining that territory is not going to be. It's big enough on paper. There's so many folks, right? But but in terms of generating meaningful growth of paying subscribers, that's certainly not where I'd be looking. I'd be looking for the people that are more interested in the process that I described of figuring out who their best self is, and then, I think a lot of folks just need that nudge to get out there, to go meet that first person, and so yeah. I mean, that's where I think the growth will be, and innovation, something other than swiping. Swiping is, like I said, it's addictive, and people don't necessarily meet. It seems, I think that there was such great growth during COVID is a testament to that. People get utility out of these applications without ever meeting somebody, and so that's not dating.
Of course, Tinder was seeded as Let's Play Tinder on college campuses rather than Let's Go on a dating app. That would not have been so shareable and really compelling for students as they were seeding into ubiquity.
Yeah. No, it's a lot closer to that original app called Hot or Not, because you get the same dopamine hits, right? As opposed, and that wasn't about meeting, not its primary goal, but it was about, everything that it represents.
Definitely. Jim, thank you. I'm going to turn to the questions in our audience now, see what we've got for you. So as I mentioned, if you've got any questions, we've got quite a few questions. We've got lots of questions. If you'd like to go in and add questions and vote any of them up, I'm just going to go through to the ones that have been voted up. Naveen, we've got you up top. Naveen runs Playdate, and she asked, how do you encourage authenticity on dating apps, especially with the growing AI trend? It's easy enough to create an AI profile, isn't it? So how do you get people to be who they really are?
That's a really good question. And there's no easy answer, but how do you encourage authenticity? I mean, when somebody's creating a profile, I mean, this would take a whole session. I'd love to sit down and go, okay, how do you do that, and brainstorm some ideas. But I think that, one way to get there is, we worked with Dr. Helen Fisher, social and cultural anthropologist, and she was amazing in developing our chemistry product that we launched from scratch. And one of her things was, we didn't have as many questions as eHarmony, but she approached it from a slightly different way, which is, many of the questions, I mean, and she kind of, and Dr. Rapaille had a similar philosophy. It's like, I don't believe what people say. I believe what they do. So, and a lot of her questions wouldn't be so literal. In some cases, she'd be asking questions and gathering answers, whether it's in long form or, multiple choice, where you don't know why she's asking that question. So you're forced to give a authentic reply because you can't really game it. You're not, but she's getting at something all through the process that is going to get to a more authentic version of you. So I think, and we just got that process started with her. I don't know that to what extent it was continued, but I think that somebody like her would be invaluable to work with, and how you create a profile that's more authentic. I think that, again, I mean, AI, sometimes I'll write a piece, all right, or an email, and I'll go to ChatGPT and I'll copy paste it and I'll say, rewrite it. And sometimes it actually comes back, really good and better than what I wrote. And I won't ever take all of it, but I'll take, some of it. So I don't, and it's more about embellishments, and then it is about getting to a more true sentence. I mean, Hemingway always said, just write one true sentence, and anybody could start there, and then start to stitch together a series of true sentences. I mean, and so I think that being clever in the questions that you ask when somebody's setting up a profile, and not just the obvious ones, I think that they'll require people to go, let me think about it. And so I do think in profile creation, making it shorter, quicker, faster is going absolutely in the wrong direction. For the people who really want to achieve the goal of meeting somebody that they might not otherwise have ever met, people are willing to invest time to get it right. And then I think building confidence along the way through the profile creation, you just keep clicking this another question. And there's little things like, complimenting them or saying that was really, that was insightful, or whatever, however you might do it along the way. It'll encourage people to I think, be more authentic, because just little things like that feel good. All anybody, I think, ever wants is to feel appreciated. And if the service or app that you're using feels like they're appreciating you, then I think that goes a long way. So yeah, I think there's a lot that can be done in profile creation. And then in terms of photographs, I mean, truth in advertising when I started at Match was a huge issue, still is a huge issue. And having authentic photos, I mean, people need to have better photographs of themselves doing what they love, that tell a story that complements everything else. And I think about brainstorm all the innovative things that could be done on that front to get the photographs right. And then there's always going to be those profiles, right, where they're not fake per se, but it's not a true representation of the person. And they do it, just to get the reward of, hey, everybody's messaging me, aren't I popular? But they're never really going to meet somebody. If they ever did, it wouldn't go well, because it doesn't, wouldn't appear to be the same creature that you'd been messaging, that instant disappointment. But I think in a lot of cases, these folks don't even bother to go out and meet anybody. Ironically, it's, if you sign up for Tinder or Bumble or any of these services, the first 20 profiles you'll see are people that are, edgy, sexy, enormously attractive. It's like, wow, why am I seeing all these first? And you get through those, and that may get you hooked to get a subscription, but you get through those, and then you're into the real database of the real people. And those real people, I think there's such beauty in just about every human. And I think that in most cases, people are willing to put in the effort, they just don't know how. And I think that designing the profile creation can help them a little bit. And then, yeah, other ways to get advice from folks. Maybe where, to have a wingmate in this process, like, where people can, help you improve, because you're not really competing with other people there. But, people love to get advice. And so maybe there's something there. It's a hell of a question.
Great. And we've got Sergei Sigatov, who's asking from Unison, who's asking, what do the market/users expect from the dating industry, in your opinion? What's the core ask of us, do you think?
When you say market, what do you mean by the market? You
In
mean
terms
like
of
the
users,
street,
what do
the
they really
street,
look
Wall Street?
for on an online dating company? Oh, no,
So
we've got
you're talking about like the street from Wall Street? What do they expect?
no, actual the users. What do the users expect from the dating industry, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, they've been bludgeoned into expecting, what they get, and it hasn't
Mhm.
changed in a long time. In fact, the user
Yeah.
experience, I think, has arguably gotten worse. And so, they what do they expect? I think their expectations, most people's are really low. There's a lucky few who end up getting real utility out of it. So, I mean, in this respect, there's a huge opportunity to surprise and delight somebody. As I said, I think that you take Plenty of Fish's Marcus's model of free, and you brought it into just focus on one demographic and then grow from there. But you brought it into a swiping app that has more thoughtful profile creation. Once you develop some success and scale, starting with one market, extending to others, it'll be impossible for the bigger players to compete because their monetization is so screwed down. Getting so much juice out of the lemon that to ever go back would be missing quarterly numbers, and they won't do that. So, and so the big players are going to be held hostage by that when it comes to creating a superior user experience. And so it's the innovators and the people starting something now or who have started it and are growing it. You have an enormous opportunity to take share from that market whose expectations just really aren't being delivered by the big players.
So it's very encouraging for the upstarts in the room. It sounds like you're saying that there's
Oh yeah.
now a time for disruption. There is a genuine time right now for disruption. So let me give you a question from someone new. Wesley asks from Arranged AI, how can matchmakers facilitate self-discovery? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think the really good ones, in my experience, that I've met are outstanding at this. And as I mentioned before, it's a certain gene that somebody has that makes them good at this. But getting to know somebody, and everybody, and myself and anybody else included, you have it's very hard to step out of yourself and look at yourself and see yourself the way you're perceived by other people. And so, what you have there with a great matchmaker is somebody who can ask the right questions, and you could have a real, interesting discussion where they're looking at it through the lens that probably most of the world is, and they just have to, extract, the answers to questions that they might ask, and also probably help with the photographs, because there's that version of you too. So I think the really good ones are great at this, and it's really hard, to create a profile and write about yourself. It's to walk that line of not being bragging too much and being some people just undersell themselves, but that true version of you, what your best qualities are. I think that sometimes it's really helpful for somebody who's really good to get some of those diamonds out of the mining process of the discussion, and then put them back, actually write the profile for the person, have them, and then you can work on editing it. But I think that would be really important.
Having said that, I mean, think about what Steve Jobs said. Do people really read these days? Do the youngsters read? They're into video. My youngsters, my 9-year-old just got a report back from school. She needs to write more. It's like, yeah, I know. She's on the videos, or she's watching her phone.
Yeah.
She's in the video.
Yeah.
So I think about what,
No, it's true.
in 10 years'
Yeah.
time, a kid's going to be able to really be inclined to write. They'll have Chat GPT available to them. So does this
Yeah.
go into video? Really?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, people, generation grow up, it doesn't read. I mean, there's exceptions, right? I hate to generalize because there's some people that do, voracious readers, but you're talking about 1%. I mean, the vast majority just don't read. And Hemingway always said, you're either a good writer or you're not, but you could become a great writer by learning from all of those who've come before you, and that requires reading. And he would read voraciously, everybody and anybody, and not to try to copy anybody's style, but he'd get little things from folks. And yeah, so he read a lot, and then the way he would write was It's humbling, to even think about it. He's so good. But the way you become a better writer is by reading, truly.
Yeah.
And then, putting those two things together. But sadly, as you say, whether it's from AI or, the profiles being simpler to be created, all of the societal winds are blowing in a direction that is going to, where people are unlikely to get back into reading. But yeah, I mean, it's a really good idea. I mean, one part of the process of that self-discovery and being a better writer it certainly comes from reading.
So there's real opportunity in helping people especially with their profiles. So let me
No
move
doubt.
on to another question. What have we got? Charlie, excellent. Charlie Brotherton whose master owns a national footprint matchmakers. You mentioned that companies are more focused on monetization of their members than the user experience. What are some ideas to provide joy, in quotes, joy and delight for the customer, or improving the customer experience?
Yeah. So, I mean, start with this. I mean, start with unlimited swipes, if you will, right? I could see why they put a wall in and say you got to subscribe if you want to swipe more. But so when they implemented that, you could imagine there was a huge lift in paid subscriptions, right? And it's like, aren't we, smart? And they were rewarded for showing that huge lift. But think about what it did for the business longer term. You have users who are less delighted. The product's less joyful for most. And by adding that conversion trigger, and then once you've had it in place for a while, it's really tough to go back, because the kind of growth you get by a more joyful experience happens organically over time. And you can't compete with that one-time lift of where the bar was reset. But what it does do for there on out, it's a fundamentally worse user experience for most people, because I mean, the other downside is, first, it's frustrating when you can't discover more people. But think about all of the other users that are out there. Somebody may have swiped right on them, like them, and which feels good to them, and there's possibility there, but they don't see that because the person's not willing to pay. So I think that I would look at all of the monetization triggers, and if there's an opportunity to reset the deck, seriously consider it, because the long-term organic growth is going to be really important. I mean, for Match Group or for Bumble, I mean, you can't roll up much more of the category, right? And so they're dealing with comparables from the previous quarter, previous year, and all the growth was mostly through M&A, and then they really turned the screws on the monetization, but user experience suffered. I would look at all those conversion triggers and figure out, because there's some that are just, to me, they're just obvious, like, got to reset that deck.
Jim Safka, you're the former CEO of Match, the turnaround CEO. Thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate your time today for interviewing and for the Q&A. Let's go into,
I appreciate you, Mark. I appreciate you, Mark, and everybody that joined. Thank you for coming. It's been really fun to talk about this industry and category. I've got a lot of heart for it, and just looking at what's happening now, I feel a lot of frustration, but I think in this group here, we've got some of the innovators who can really do some interesting things. So I'm behind y'all.
I say, why don't we move to the networking table? I say table because I'm going to make it just one table rather than having tables. So folks, if you'd like to come and meet Jim and hang out for a few minutes, as long as Jim has available, 10, 15 minutes, I will move us out of this area and we'll go to a table. I'm just going to max it out so you can have as many people as possible on a table. So great. Thank you, Jim.